Continuing lesson 3-2 on connecting percent and proportion. If you look at the do you know how, page 146, number 5B, it says what percent is 17 out of 40? So one option we could do here, we could do a proportion like they're setting up for. When we set these up, we're going to have the part over the whole. So we are trying to find the percent, so they put a P for that. We know a percent's a number out of 100. So the other part of our proportion, we could put 17 out of 40. Okay? At this point, we could try to look for a pattern here. So this is multiplying by 2.5 going towards the variable. So if we do 17 times 2.5, that should be our answer. So that is going to be 42.5. And remember, we're trying to find a percent, so that's 42.5%. So we're saying 42.5% is the same as 17 out of 40. Another option you have there is you could, without even setting up a proportion, you could take 17 divided by 40 and you get 0.425, and then just move your decimal 2 spots to the right. Workbook page 35. If you look at number 1, a bike path is 12.5 miles. Dominic is 70% of the way to the end. So how far is Dominic on the path? The book has some blanks here. They've got kind of a framework set up for us. If you want to use that, you can. If you want to do it a different way, that's okay also. If you do this as a proportion, 70% they've given us this time. So we could write that as 70 over 100. P is for either part or path here. It's not for percent. So it's kind of confusing. Maybe you looked at that and thought P was for percent like the other problem we worked. And that's why, I probably would have used X or some other letter so we don't get confused on that part. So then underneath the P would be the 12.5. 12.5 is the whole. Remember, we can set this up as part over whole. The part, we're trying to find what part of the way he's through this thing if the whole thing is 12.5 miles. So pattern here might not be apparent if we're looking at this, but if you use a calculator, a little bit quicker anyway, way of getting to it. If you do 100 divided by 12.5 is 8. Make sure you go back towards the variable. So going from 100 to 12.5, that would be dividing by 8. And so if you do 70 divided by 8, then you would get 8.75. So 8.75, so he has biked 8.75 miles. And then just try and think about your answer if it makes sense or not. The whole thing's 12.5 miles, so half of that would be 6 1/4 miles. He's gone 70%, which is over half, so your answer should be more than 6 1/4 miles, and it is, and so we should be in good shape. If we look at number 2, of 350 solitaire games that Jay played, he won 154 times. What percent of the games did Jay win? Oh, real quick before we do this, I forgot to mention on this one, if you didn't do it the way the book did, you could work out what 70% of 12.5 is. So change 70% to a decimal and multiply, and you'll get 8.75. Okay, so this time we're trying to find the percent again. So what we could do, our part is the 154 games that he won out of the 350. We're trying to find the percent. And we know percent's a number out of 100. And again, I don't know why they didn't just do P for percent here, but they didn't, so. So pattern here, if you do 350 divided by 100, it's 3.5. That's the direction we're headed, so we would divide by 3.5, which is 44. And we're finding a percent, so that means 44%. So what are we saying? We're saying he won 44% of the games. Well, half the games, if you take half of 350 is 175. 154, it's a little less than half, so that seems reasonable to be 44%. Number 3, a regular tube of toothpaste costs $2.50 for 3.2 ounces. A travel size costs $1 for 1.2 ounces. Compare the prices and weights using the percent to decide which is the better buy. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit different maybe than the book here. I'm not going to really worry about percents. I'm just going to figure out what the price per ounce is for each of these. So to do that, we can divide the price by the number of ounces. So for the regular, we can do 250 divided by 3.2. And that comes out not very nice. It's about I guess exactly 0.78125. And that's cents per ounce. So that's, you know, if we rounded it off, it'd be about 78 cents per ounce. If we look at the travel one, we could do $1 divided by 1.2. So if you divide that out, is 0.83 repeating. So that one is about 83 cents per ounce. That was the travel. The first one was the regular. So if we're just looking for the better buy, we could say that the regular one is a better buy because it's 78 cents per ounce versus 83 cents per ounce. So it's, you know, specifically we could say it's about 5 cents per ounce cheaper. Number 4, Kevin drove his car to a concert. His car can go 400 miles with a full tank of gas. He used 30% of the full tank of gas to get to the concert while traveling 60 miles per hour. How long did it take Kevin to get to the concert? So it says 30% of the full tank of gas. The full tank of gas is 400 miles. So one way of doing this, we could figure out what's 30% of 400. That'll tell us how many miles they've driven. If you want to just change that percent to a decimal, if you multiply that, it'll be 120 miles. So 120 miles, and if they're going 60 miles per hour, we want to see how many 60s till we get to 120, which we can probably just figure it out. But to have some work down for it, we could take 120 divided by 60, and then we'll see that that would be 2 hours. Number 6, investors buy a studio apartment for $240,000. Of this amount, they have a down payment of $60,000. Their down payment is what percent of the purchase price? So what you could do is look at what your part and your whole are. So in this case, the $60,000 is part of $240,000. If you want to do a proportion, you can. We're trying to find the percent. Percent's a number out of 100. This is actually a nice pattern here. Normally we might go across, but we can go up and down also. This would be dividing by 4, going towards the variable, and 100 divided by 4 is 25, so that would be 25%. Another thing you could do, you could just take 60,000 divided by 240,000 and you get 0.25, and that's your decimal. And then if you just move your decimal over 2 spots, that'll tell you what the percent is. And if you think about it, hopefully that's reasonable to you. 240,000, half of that, so 50% would be 120,000. This is half of the half, basically, if you think of it that way. Number 10, Nadia is a stockbroker. She earns 4% commission when she sells stocks. Last week, she earned $288 in commission. What was the total amount of her sales? So whether you're a fan of it or not initially, the proportions are kind of helpful for a lot of these, I think. If you look at it as a part over whole and try to set up a proportion, yeah, you might have more success than just randomly, changing percents to decimals and multiplying and dividing and just see what happens. If you really understand what's going on and can get it that way, that's fine, but otherwise this might be an option for you. So one thing we could do on this is 4%, they're telling me it's 4% commission. We know 4% is 4 over 100. And then the question is, what goes in the other part? What's the part and what's the whole? Well, commission is you're earning something based off of what you're selling. We're trying to find, if you look here, they kind of give us a little bit of a hint. We're trying to find the total amount of sales. So 288, the commission is the part, and then the other thing's what we're trying to find. I'm going to do T for total sales. If you want to do an S, we got all kinds of reasons why we have to do things a little different. Curled bottom on the T so it doesn't look like a plus sign. S, you might do a cursive S so it doesn't look like a 5. So we got a pattern here. If you do 288 divided by 4 is 72. So this is multiplying by 72. So 100 times 72 is $7,200. There are other ways you could set that up and still get the answer as long as you're consistent. This is probably overall, if you're consistently setting up the percent as one of your fractions and the other thing as a part over whole, is probably going to give you more success overall though. Number 11, a large container has a maximum capacity of 64 ounces. The container is filled with 8 ounces less than its maximum capacity. Make sure you take that whole phrase in, okay? It's not filled with 8 ounces, it's filled with 8 ounces less than its maximum capacity. So the question part A, to what percent of its capacity is the large container filled? So doing something like this, if you want to draw a picture here, if that helps you to visualize what's happening. So 64 ounces would be the capacity. It's 8 ounces less than the capacity. So first of all, if we do 64 minus 8 is 56, that'll tell you that we have it filled up to 56 ounces. And then the question is, what percent of the capacity is that? So if you wanted, we could do part over whole. And so we've got 56 out of 64. And we're trying to find the percent. So we're finding the number out of 100. And when you're finding the percent, like we've said before, if you want to, otherwise just divide those numbers out, and that'll give you a decimal, and then just move your decimal over 2 spots. That works too. Different ways of doing this. One option, if you do 100 divided by 64, is 1.5625. So if we multiply that, that's one option. That'll be 87.5%. Or you could just take 56 divided by 64 and you'll get 0.875, and then just move your decimal over 2 spots to the right. Part B. Some liquid will be poured from a full 16-ounce container until it is filled to the same percent of its capacity as the large container. How many ounces must be poured from the full 16-ounce container? So we want to get it filled up to 87.5%. So there's different ways of doing this. One option, we could figure out what 87.5% of 16 is. So you could change that percent to a decimal and multiply that, and that's going to be 14 ounces. What that means is we need 14 ounces to be in the container. So it was a 16-ounce container. So if you do 16 minus 14, that means 2 ounces would have to be poured out to get it to that percent. So this gives you an idea of how to connect percent and proportion.